of what you like. It does brown up in the winter. You can overseed Zoysia and Bermudas with other grasses that will stay green all year, different rye, even fescues. But the thing is, especially with Bermuda, it will choke those out. Zoysia won't as much. It is. It does both, actually.
I only chose the Zoysia, and I'm trying to experiment to because it stays brown, it stays green longer, and greens up early in the spring.
It does. Those are some draws to it. How are you? Good.
A while back, where everybody else is just brown. It's green. It looked a lot better from the distance than it did close up.
Yes.
When you look straight down into it, it's not too impressive.
It puts off a good show, and if that's what it puts off a good show, and if that's what you want, that's great. But it's meant for more like turf, like true turf. A lot of football fields, soccer fields, that's what they're seeded with, is Bermuda for those reasons, and overseeded with annual rye because it can handle the pressure really well. But just to be an ornamental lawn, Bermuda has its drawbacks because it's just not as if you don't mow it correctly, it doesn't get as thick and dense at the base. It's just really showy at the top, if that makes sense. Yeah, you don't do Bermuda really short. That's ineffective for it to be able to grow as thick and full as you would need it to be the attractive lawn that you would want. And we'll talk about the levels of mowing and why it's important to mow your grass at those different levels and stands for each different type.
A couple examples.
We can look at them afterwards if that's okay. Yeah. We'll see if we can figure out what they are and go from there. I've knocked it over twice. There are some harder chemicals out there. Depending on what it is and how aggressive it needs to be treated, you might have to get a private applicator license to get some harder chemicals. You just have to, it's a 6-hour class you have to take to say you'll use these chemicals effective. And it opens up your users. Yes. It's a 6-hour class you can take here. We'll schedule it anytime you want to take it. I used to try to do them one night a month, and I would sit here and nobody would show up. So we just kind of schedule them as we need to now. It's actually a video at this point. They've changed up the format. You can actually do it at home now. We do have an online forum you can do it with. Where? Well, it's a recorded presentation out of Knoxville is what it is, but it's on Kate is the UT system it's registered with. And if you'll put your email back there and put private applicator next over in the suggested topics, I know what you're talking about, and I can email you the links to do it if you want to do it at home.
And then I can buy
you can do the restricted use chemicals that way. Like I said, we can look at it and see if imagine if what you're trying isn't working, it's probably going to take a step up chemical, and we can figure out which one it needs exactly. How was market this morning?
Slow, but I did well.
Good.
It's okay if there's only 3 people as long as they've got these pockets.
Yes. It looked like there wasn't quite as many vendors there this morning when I drove by. We tried to do lunch and learn and the market all in one day. Last month, well, we did it 2 months in a row, and after last month, Lisa and I were like, no, because we were trying to break everything down and both get here. We're just not going to do it this week. We took a break from it so we could sleep. We were there last week, and we'll be there next week, and then Lisa will be there Labor Day weekend. Okay, good deal. All right. So we can go ahead and get started. It's right at noon. I'm going to take this off if that is okay with you all. I will stay back. I won't promise I won't get in your face and yell. So we're going to talk about what it takes to get these lawns and expectations of them, and I'll explain a little bit more as we go through what we're going to talk about. But to start off, most of you guys know you're at the UT Extension office. If not, welcome. Welcome to the UT Extension office. This is all of our staff. I'm the agricultural agent. Anna is our 4-H Family and Consumer Science agent. Lisa is our Family and Consumer Science agent, and Linda is the smiling face that welcomes all of you if you come here during the week. And then we have an open position currently, so we hope to be growing our team soon. But what the purpose of what we do here at the office is we bring the research to the people. So that is our goal. We're considered the front porch of the university, whether it's ag information or youth development or family and consumer sciences or traditional the home economist position. That is what our goal is to bring the research to the people in a way that is understandable and approachable. What I do specifically, I get a lot of that question of my job is anything agriculture related. So from livestock, I can literally teach a producer how to castrate a calf to backyard poultry management, how to handle and grow chickens appropriately, to grazing management. So taking these principles onto a commercial scale of literally growing grass for feed. Similar, good bit different when we're going from working on a 1 acre to a ½ acre lawn to 50 to 60 acres of grass, but similar principles. Weed management for those as well. And then I do residential horticulture. So anything dealing with vegetable gardens, turf grass, weed control in your yard, pest control management, whether that is mammal pest control or insect, things like that. And then tree management to help with work with our local forester to help with either commercial tree stands or backyard or urban forestry tree stands, or just what's going on with a maple tree in your backyard. Wide variety of things. A big part of also falls under the residential horticulture is the Master Gardener program that is sponsored by the University of Tennessee. Lucy and Catherine both are a part of our Master Gardener program here, and they are trained volunteers by the university. So if you're ever interested in joining, be a part of that group, just let us know. We'd be happy to have you.
And I would point out that you are here as a result of the Master Gardener program.
Yes. Yes, I have a plug for that later. You got ahead of me. Yeah, yes, we're going to talk about those too. We have lots of plugs in this thing, in here. I'm also very corny and I like to interact with you all. If you have questions, feel free to talk to me. Yes, we could probably work with some of those too. But interact, talk with me. Don't feel like you have to wait until the end to ask questions. If you are watching us on Facebook, Zoom, or YouTube, I'm doing my best to check those chats too to help answer questions. If you have any on Zoom, just put them in the chat box and I will look at it. We do have a couple on there with us. But so we're going to talk a little bit about fall seeding, specifically selection, because you can't seed and you can't work with your yard if you don't know what you're going to do and what you're wanting to plant. So we'll spend a lot of time talking about the different types of grasses that we can look at and choose that are common here in East Tennessee. We'll touch on weed control and some common weeds and some common pre-practices you can do to help suppress the weeds before they get there. And then tips as far as what we need to do with renovation, the easiest way to get the lawn that you want, and then some solution and troubleshooting for some really common things. So we're going to hit this. Looks like my thing's dead. That's okay. I'm just stand here and do this. There it goes. So if you want a weed-free lawn, pack up and move where there's concrete. It's just what it is. You're with an area, especially here in East Tennessee, we can grow everything. But the problem is we can grow everything's problem too. So we have to take that into consideration. Our temperatures are wonderful. We have very deep seed beds for a lot of natural grasses that are really good for us to work with. but also a lot of weeds that are issues and hindrances to that beautiful lawn. And it can come with an expense. So when you're going into this and managing what you want out of your lawn, part of that planning and preparation needs to be what your budget is with this. If you want to spend a lot of money to have that perfect green lawn, that's great. I will help you figure out how to do it. If you are okay in the school that if you mow it at the right height, it looks like green grass, I can help you figure out how to manage it too. However you wish to work with this. There's expectations. If you're in the middle where you want to encourage your grass, but you don't really care if there's a lot of weeds growing in it too, we can help find that avenue there. So the basic requirements with grass is the basic same principle as if you're planting a garden, if you're planting ornamentals and landscapes. It has to have the right amount of light. Some grasses are more shade tolerant than others. Temperature, some grasses grow really well in colder climates, warmer climates. They need the right amount of water. They need the right nutrition. Atmospheric carbon dioxide. So where we breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide, plants do the opposite. They take in the carbon dioxide and breathe out the oxygen. So that needs to be right for our area too. Some areas, the air makeup is just not as well. That's why some grasses don't grow as well as say in a metropolitan area, because their air quality is different. And then nutrition. So this chart over here on the side, we'll look at a little bit more in depth, but it shows exactly what, with the pH, optimal pH for grass is usually between 6 and 6.5. And if you will see, if you look straight through there, those major nutrients are at their highest uptake rates at about 6.5. If you go to basic or to acidic after that, it's uptaking less nutrients for those plants. So that's why we want to make sure that pH is there, because you can put all the fertilizer in the world out there, but if your pH isn't right in the soil for that specific type of plant you're growing, whether it's grass or anything else, it's not going to be able to uptake it. It's not movable at that point. So your pH and your is really the biggest key when it comes to making sure our fertilizing plan is accurate.
Is there a way to test the pH without taking samples and sending them off and getting done?
There are some pH kits at Lowe's and other places. How accurate they are has not been tested for me to be able to tell you, or we don't have it in our research for me to be able to tell you that they'll be spot on. On average, they are not as accurate as a full-blown soil test.
So, if I want to have a pH, it's do soil test, send it out, give it done, take $15.
That's to get the most accurate, because what they'll do in the lab is you'll actually get two values. You get the buffer value that allows to be able to build the exact what we need for fertilize, and then you'll get the actual pH to know what needs to be adjusted for liming and things like that.
Is that testing resumed then?
Yes, it has never stopped.
It never stopped.
It never stopped. The lab never closed. They have been taking soil samples all winter, all year. I have a soil kit for you in your folder today to take with you, and the information to put how to fill it out. And we'll talk about those here in a minute too.
Does this office still run?
We do. Yes, it works really well. It saves a lot of time. If you'll come to the office, we have one here. Sign it out, bring it back. We ask usually in about 2 days if you can. And then if we have a large enough group, we can ship them off for you. But on average, most of the time, we ask you to mail the sample to Nashville. And I'll give you some tips on how to make it cheaper here in a few minutes too. So, selection, we hit on these things. The shade level really varies as far as what its tolerance is for the type of grass. Your soil depth, you need at least about an inch and a half of topsoil for it to really work. Now, we live in East Tennessee. We know we generally don't have that depth of topsoil. Clay doesn't count. But that's where doing proper amendments come into play, and working with improving what ground you have to make a better soil bed for our plants and our grass. Seasonal expectations, if you care that it's brown in the winter or not. If you don't care, then warm season grasses are going to outperform cool season grasses more often than not. But if you want to keep it green all year, then you're going to want to look towards these cool season grasses or look at a blend of such to get that green all year. It turns into overall what you want and the quality that you expect to have. Like I said, going in with the expectation of what your budget is, with anything you're planning, how much you're willing to put into this, your time and your expense, and what overall quality you want at the end of the day. If you want it as close to perfect as possible, or if you want it, if you're okay with expecting some weeds and having to manage those throughout it. So these are our common grasses that we have here. Tall fescue and fine fescues, Kentucky bluegrass, and ryegrass are our common cool seasons. There are several different variations of ryegrass I'll show here in just a second. And then our warm seasons are Bermudas, our Zoysias, centipede grass, and St. Augustine grasses. The two most common of those here are Bermuda and Zoysia. So again, those expectations, what you can expect. Tall fescue and cool season turf grasses can end up getting injured and turn brown here during the summer. The last few weeks without it raining, if you weren't irrigating, I can guarantee you your lawn crunched when you walk through it. And that's where, if you want that nice, beautiful, solid green grass all summer, you're going to want to consider going into an irrigation system of some sort, because that water level expectation is usually still within about at least an inch of water a week. And we'll talk in more depth of how much and what stages they need it here. Warm season grasses, you can start seeing frost season patterns into as you go into late fall and early spring. A lot of times people think it's a disease coming up in their grass. No, it's just where those grasses don't like getting cold and they got too cold. So they stressed out. Yes.
Even irrigation
Mhm.
doesn't seem to be enough with fescues. I irrigated this summer, earlier summer, up to a couple weeks ago, to the point where I was getting a brown patch.
Yeah, you were doing it too hard. So there's fine level.
Right.
Yeah.
And even that was not enough to keep the grass green up until the brown patch started.
And it's also the difference with, are you irrigating with city water or with lake water? Okay.
It should be fine.
Which should have been fine. There shouldn't be the chlorine levels that can be cause issues there.
When I tried to do this year something a little different, was I was doing a deep watering overnight, twice a week.
Okay.
But then every day I was doing a real quick watering 3 times a day in the afternoon, just to cool it, just to try to cool it, see if the temperature made a difference. But then that's where the brown patch kicked in.
Yeah.
Too much.
Yes. So we'll talk a little about timings here in a little bit, and that could be a variation of part of the issue. It could also just be how saturated or how compacted the soil may be. It might not be holding water as well. It could be holding water too well in some places. So we'll talk about some troubleshooting. Hopefully we can pinpoint out here in a minute. So if you can bear with me, we'll hold that one for a few minutes. So these charts kind of go through of how these grow, what their growth habits are, their texture, how resistant they are to holding too much thatch, heat tolerancy, shade tolerancy. Most fescues don't like a lot of shade. They can tolerate some. There are some blends that they're working with now to be more shade tolerant than our traditional fescues are, but the data is not out on them yet for us to be able to say, yes, they're great. There are fescue blends that you can buy that are labeled for dense usage. Yes. Go ahead.
I have a part of the yard is deeply shaded, really big trees. And the tall fescue last year, it completely died. It completely died. By the end of the summer, there was no more live grass in there. So this year I tried overseeding it with creeping red fescue, which is supposed to be much more shade tolerant, and it also spread. It looked great until we had all the leaves, and then very slowly over time, it died too. There's almost none left in there. I don't think it's the heat or moisture because I irrigate.
It's the shade tolerance of that, even though they are labeled to handle shade. Saying on those labels, and when you say it, if you look at it, it just says has shade tolerance. It doesn't tell you the level of which most often, whether it's good or not. Most of them in our categories fall into the medium to low tolerancy, even at the ones that are supposedly considered dense. That's the reason we don't lend or shade dense seeds. That's the reason and our research says there's not many that fall into that high shade tolerance zone.
Are there any that will grow here?
Not that I've seen yet. There are a couple they're doing testing on. The rye and the ryegrasses, some of those are a lot more tolerant than the fescue to shade, especially perennial rye. But the problem with perennial rye is our temperatures in the summer can be detrimental to it. So it's trade-offs.
I'm thinking mulch right
Mulch works really well. And moss can. The only thing is with the moss, to get it acidic enough for it to grow there, you're going to run the risk of turning away grass further out. And two, what type of trees are these around, or do you have in your yard?
It's a variety.
Mhm.
There's a walnut
Okay.
over there. There are some oaks. There are some
Okay.
tulip poplars and some sugar maples.
Okay. So the reason I was asking, oaks and walnuts have a tendency that they can put out a chemical that they produce naturally that doesn't allow grass to grow up to the base of those trees. So regardless of what you plant there, that's not going to grow. And then also the acidity that oak tree leaves breaking down will also kill away grass as well. Yeah. It can still, as those trees, they produce that acidity naturally. Grass won't grow as well close to the base and out into the root zones of those trees.
But you would expect that to be a year-round.
Not necessarily. As those trees are dormant, it's not producing and actively producing that information at that point. When it's growing to grow, it's taking all of those nutrients back out and pushing all that out to take everything away from what's around it to focus on growing. So you'll have better things. Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
So the vine grasses, do they go dormant in the summer or die?
Which, the cool season grasses? The rye, most of the time they will still try to grow. They will just, annual obviously won't. It will die out. Once it's seeds, it's done. Perennial will still continue to grow. It's just at a slower rate. And the heat tends to stress it, especially when we start mowing. It just consistently gets too much stress and it will die back.
But it will recover.
Most of the time it will recover. If it goes through too much of a stress, it won't. We don't have our area here, it recovers better than say on up northeast Tennessee and southeastern Tennessee. We're right here enough on the plateau and in the valley, edge of the valley enough that we have better success with it here than other areas. So Kentucky bluegrass is a little bit more effective as far as putting a mat out because it grows the same way as say Bermuda or Zoysia does. It goes laterally with rhizomes across the soil, so it'll produce a mat. It does like a lot of water though. It is a lot more aggressive when it comes to how much water it takes. It does require pretty fertile soil in comparison to some of the others. Its heat tolerance is pretty fair. The reason it got its name is it was found on a roadside in Kentucky. They took it, studied it, realized it worked well. That's how it got the name Kentucky bluegrass. So it's pretty native to this area and section of the world to grow pretty well. When we're growing, it can also handle being cut shorter. If you'll notice on these two on the bottom line, it says the cutting heights. I have a bigger chart for you here in a minute that shows all of them. But it can handle being cut shorter down to that 1.5 inches more frequently if that's what you prefer. I'll talk in a second about why we encourage mowing at higher rates and encouraging growth. If you notice, its thrive point is at 3. So that's where most of these are going to sit, but it can also handle that pressure a little more. Fine fescues are the ones that work the best in shaded sites, but it still does not qualify in our area to say it's highly effective. They still fall in the mediumly effective rates. And they're a lot narrower, so they don't have as much space to need to take up as much sun and as much carbohydrates, is why they work better in shaded areas. Good.
So if you got a yard that
Mhm.
has, this patch has full sun,
Mhm.
and then 2 feet over
Mhm.
it's in the shade, you have to put 2 different types of grass on that?
Hypothetically, you could. You can try to spread it out, but you're going to want to overseed that section that has the more shade habits if you want grass to grow there better with something that is going to handle that shade. Now, the fine fescues will grow all the way across. They'll handle sun pretty well too. They're just not as hardy as the tall fescue. So the perennial ryegrass, the reason we say it's often short-lived is because of the high temperatures. It can stress out that it doesn't handle our summer experience to come back as well in the fall as the fescues do. This summer especially, where it's been a little rougher on it because it's been drier and it's not as drought tolerant. It requires a lot more water into it than fescue would. It is pretty resistant to disease and can hold off disease pressure fairly well, except for fungals. That's where the temperature issues come in with them. It doesn't fight off fungal issues well at all, and it grows in a clumping form. It doesn't spread out as a mat with those rhizomes like the bluegrass does. Annual ryegrass, if you're building a house, more often than not, this is what gets thrown out there because it germinates really quickly. It helps stabilize the soil. It doesn't mix well with other things, so it's usually thrown out there to get a stand up of grass to give you time to overseed or get to a better course of year or a better point in the year to grow. And it is aggressive. That's the good thing when you're first putting it out to stabilize things is it takes off, it germinates really well, spreads out, does its job. The only thing is once it goes through its growth season, it's done. It's not coming back. So you're going to need to overseed with something else when you're using these in those scenarios. A lot of your contractors mixes and things like that, it's very heavy in these because the goal is to get something green coming up quickly to stabilize the soil. That's the most common practice for these.
So when you say it does not mix well with the grasses, what does that mean?
It's going to get choked out. It doesn't stand up well to the pressure from other grasses is why we don't mix it.
So
Yeah.
It's not that
It doesn't crowd out anything else. It's just going to get crowded out really quickly. That's the reason we throw it out to stabilize things and then seed over it. It leaves, the new comes up. Everybody keeps moving. So Bermuda grass, it's very rapid growing. It comes up stolon based and rhizomial through the soil. That's why it spreads out really well. It's a nice thick mat. However, it will take over everything. If you have vegetable garden landscaping, you're going to be around this area, you're going to be fighting with it to keep it out. You can do borders and different things around it. It does have a pretty low shade tolerance. It really likes the sun. It handles traffic really well, so you'll see this a lot in summer turf fields and things for different sports. Zoysia grass is becoming more popular because it does do the same. It does have the same effect of doing the rhizomial growth. It has really good choking out potential of seeds of weeds and providing pressure. The thing is, it can be expensive because the most effective ways to do this is with sod. The second most effective is to do plugging or sprigging. And so it's very slow growing. But once you get it to go growing and taking establishment, it will choke out things just as effectively as Bermuda will. And it doesn't spread as much. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. At least 2 inches, if you can. Just because ideally that Bermuda grass is only growing in that top inch of soil. So if you can get below that to that 2-inch mark, it shouldn't go under it. You'll have more issue with it if you let it get tall enough at that edge to go over it. It has a variable tolerance depending on which variety of zoysia you get to how well it handles our temperatures. The low temperature aspect of it and the texture of it, the Japonica, sorry, Zoysia grass is the most effective for our area and handles the change in temperature pretty well. Zoysia japonica. Japonica.
I don't know if I planted soybeans, and I don't know if it's, whatever I got from Lowe's, that's what it was.
Gotcha. I haven't looked to see what variety they sell. Tenuifolia, Tenuifolia, and Matrella. More than likely, from what I've seen on labels, I don't know what they sell specifically, but the Japonica is most common.
It's called Z.
Yeah. And see, each company is going to have its own different name to it. This is the scientific name for it.
Well, I planted 4,000 square feet of soy. And put on sign like it was going to be between $4,000 and $6,000. So as an experiment, I put down $400 of the seed. See what happens. And it's very slow growing, but it's coming up. But it comes up so slow. The weeding process is starting, and that's the fist fight is the weeds. It does come up slow.
You have to fight really aggressively as far as it comes to pre-emergent work, and then also what's safe to use in Zoysia grass is post-emergent. And we'll talk about those chemicals when we get to that point here in a few minutes. But the biggest part of anything is preparing and making sure you have your solid plan before you start doing this. When it comes to anything, the leading cause of failure is because we didn't plan correctly, or at least have a backup plan, because in my experience, you make plans and then they go somewhere else, and so you have to go with plan B. So have some things and options ready. So the first start with all that we're going to talk about is, how we're going to look at planning and how we're planning to do this. So we picked our grass. We know with our ryegrass, our fescues, and even Bermuda seeding can work pretty effectively. If we're going with our zoysias, we're going to be looking at plugging. And so you wouldn't worry about this as much with the zoysias if you're going to be plugging. If you're going to take a chance on the seed, it can work. You just have to be ready to work with the weeds around it, as it is very slow to come in. You need to make sure you can have good direct soil contact. So whether you're going to completely be starting fresh in an area, or if you're renovating an area, if you need to kill off what's there, we'll talk about how. The average rate is, though, if the area has 50% less of a stand of grass. So if less than 50% of the area is covered in weeds, you can generally not have to kill everything off. At that point, what you're planting should be able to help grow and choke and suppress those weeds out. If it's greater than 50%, we would want to look at killing off what's there and starting over. It's not required at that point. It's just going to be an easier avenue at that point. Germination rates all are going to depend on what you're growing. So you want to make sure, if we can, like I said, keep it less than that 50% of weed pressure. If we can have pretty even topsoil depths, the only issue is if you're bringing in traditional topsoil, you're bringing in somebody else's seed bank. They do make sterilized topsoil that you can buy bags of, or even sterilized garden soils you can use to level out. If you have a moisture control issue, even moisture control potting soil can be used to level some things out. It just depends on what works for in your home to need to do. When you're planting these seeds, you need to be able to cover them, because you're wanting to help hold moisture down to them. You're also wanting to protect them from running off. So erosion control mats, if you're using straw. If you use straw, you will see probably some wheat grow back up. When you start mowing grass, it can't handle the cutting, so you don't have to worry about that causing a problem. Hydro seeding is a process of taking the seeds, mixing it with water-based substance that will literally spray onto the side and it will stick and hold it to the ground. We usually only do this on extreme slopes. A lot of roadside areas get done this way. So when you're planting these, even if you're overseeding, these rates look about the same. If you're going to do fescues, you're looking at about 5 to 8 pounds per 1,000 square feet. With Zoysia grass, you're looking at about a 1/2 pound to 3 pounds per 1,000 square feet. But with Zoysia, this is what our standard publication says. Reading what other universities and what other companies say about Zoysia, if you're going to seed this, you would almost want to double this for as slow growing as it is to give yourself a better chance. Go ahead.
Why is the overseeding rate as high as the new grass? New seed.
With the overseeding, if you put in less than that, rephrase that. And when you're overseeding, it doesn't have as much direct access to the soil. So when you're putting those in, if you cut that rate down any, you're reducing how much is potentially going to get to that soil to make contact. And you're also generally wanting to choke out what's there and encourage more growth. So you're going to want more of what you're planting to come up than what's usually there. And as you're looking at some of these, the overseeding rates will vary a little, but for most common, they are going to be pretty much identical. For those reasons of you're wanting it to compete with what's there. So you want to put more of it down than what's there. So these are just the average germination periods to show the annual ryegrass usually comes up in less than a week. That's the reason we like to use it for those stabilization things and stabilization areas, as opposed to say bluegrass, it can take up to 3 weeks to come up. Anyone? Go ahead. Yeah, you go ahead. For tall fescue. And that's generally at 68 to 86 degrees.
Is that the recommended temperature range too?
Yes, when you're working with it. When you're seeding these here, the best time to plant it is going to be September 15th through November 15th. It gives it a chance to grow. It's growing in a time period that it's less stressed. If you see here, yes, it grows and shoot growth really well in the spring, but then it drops off again in the summer. It doesn't handle the heat well to be able to continue growing through it. The average is if you plant it in the spring, you're going to have to overseed it in the fall because usually about 50% of it can't withstand establishing throughout the summer heats, droughts, and temperatures here. And the birds eat the seeds.
Trouble with that time period is that's also the time period when all the leaves are coming out.
Yes. And depending on the types of leaves in your yard, it can be a problem.
And you don't want to be vacuuming up leaves when you might be vacuuming up seed.
Yes. Most of these environments we're looking at doing this, you're going to generally plant this and then try to not do anything in that area for about that 2-week period. Unfortunately, that means you're going to have a lot of weeds, except water, if you need it. If it's raining, generally, that's also usually about this time of year here. We shouldn't have to irrigate as much either. So it's not as expensive to plant them this time of year as opposed to the spring. And then Zoysia and our Bermuda grasses can take anywhere from 10 days to 21 days, depending on the varieties that we're looking at. And so their germination temperature, go ahead.
I planted my Zoysia grass on June 5th.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see anything until late July.
Did you?
The guy called you about that.
Yeah.
What's going on here? You know, I mean,
And we talked about, average research says that it takes 21 days. If you go to reading seed companies and seed labels, it can say up to 28 to 30 days. You have to remember when our research is done, it's done in the perfect environment. And that's unfortunate for most often, our environments we're working in aren't perfect and under the perfect conditions. So this is the averages, but it can take longer than that. Most seed companies will usually have about an extra 7 days tacked on to the end of these high ranges. than what we have. This is what was done in our research studies. And also this research was last updated in probably about 2010. Our weather pattern is a lot different now than it was in 2010. So they're looking, all of this research is in the process of being redone within the turfgrass department, and even with the forages and as far as pastures, because our weather pattern's changing from when these were originally done. So the best time to plant our warm season grasses is just the opposite, April 15th to about June 15th. And that's strictly because that's when they have the most temperature things that they need, the most amount of water. They're going to be more tolerant to handling if it's not as wet to work with. They're going to be a little more tolerant to those drought conditions. Not to say that if you are planting and it's dry, you don't need to water, because for germination to happen, it requires water. If not, the seed's just going to sit there, or the birds are really going to enjoy it. So the method of how you choose to do this is going to vary upon what it is. Broadcast seeding, walking with it, push behind broadcaster, pull behind broadcaster, any of those options will work. Very unscientific method. It's not going to get the rates right, but if you have it measured out to how much it is, even you standing and walking and throwing is accurate. You can be the broadcast spreader too. You don't have to have the piece of equipment. Slit seating, which literally goes in. We usually don't see this done as far as homes unless it's being done right when the home is being built and a landscape company's coming in and do this. This is more on turf fields or golf courses. You'll see slit seeding occur that literally goes in, it cuts a slit into the ground, puts the seed directly into the soil, and it will grow in very precise rows as it comes up. It's very pretty to see it when it first occurs. They do. It's exactly the same principle as doing corn and what a combine planter does. You're not wrong. It is exactly the same process. Which is suffice to say, a plant's a plant, regardless if you're talking about grass or if you're talking about a production plant. They all require the same basic needs, and we're all going to plant them the same basic ways. Sodding is very expensive, but it is effective. The only thing is it does have a lifespan on it if you're not maintaining it and encouraging that weed suppression, because that bottom base mat that's on there when you put sod down is only there so long. Eventually, weeds will continue to encroach back in. They require maintenance. Plugging the device there, it's literally, that's where they're harvesting those plugs. They'll go in, plug them out from the mats, take them and sell them. You will plant those individual plugs into your yard. Had a phone call the other day. Their neighbor was moving and they had this beautiful Zoysia grass. And the neighbor told them they could come and dig up as much as they wanted if they went and did it, if it would grow in their yard. And yes, it will. Other than I feel that new homeowner's not going to be real happy to find half of their backyard's probably dug out when they get there. But yes, you can if you have a stand of it somewhere else. If you get a stand going, for example, where Tom has planted his, if he gets a stand going there and it's very nice and strong, he can harvest his own plugs and move them other places. It will continue to grow and spread. So those are some options too, as you're working on one spot and getting it how you want. With Zoysia, for example, you can borrow from it to help build up other areas. And then sprigging also is, You do, you do. And it takes a while. You're not going to go in expecting to have both areas done in 5 years. Once you get the first one, you can start moving and spreading it other areas. You can do that with other grasses, but Zoysia is the most effective one at doing that with. Just a bonus information. So renovation has different titles. Essentially, we look at it as either killing existing turf and replacing it with new, or converting an existing stand of weeds into a usable stand of grass. So a lot of it is because what we have there can't stand to the heat as well as we would like it to, or it doesn't handle our the cold temperatures as well as we'd like it to. AKA, you have warm season growing there. You don't like the fact your yard is brown in the wintertime. You want to encourage some cold season, vice versa with those two. What you have there is drought tolerant. Our wetter, and you're having to do things more. Some areas, it's because we have a lot of saturated soils going on, or our ground is really dry and compacted, and we're wanting to improve that. And we can talk about how I'm gonna explain here in just a few minutes how just some common practices can help change the compaction of our soil before we have to go to looking at renovating our entire area. And sometimes we need to look at removing some thatch. That can be just a one simple step renovation practice. If you have too thick of a thatch bed there, your grass can't grow. It's getting choked out by its own. That's your problem.
Well, how much is too much then?
So generally, I'm going to skip here. We'll come back to those in a second. Yeah, I went backwards, but we'll get there in a second. But generally, we talked about this already, the 50% coverage rates if you're wanting to renovate. If it's more than 50% weeds, so we're going to want to look at killing it off with a non-selective herbicide, which is like glyphosate or other products out there. Or there are ways to do it without going that route as well. If you don't want to use chemicals, there are other options. So the way we're going to look at this, those aerial shoots are what's above the ground. The roots are below the ground. The thatch is that area in the middle where it's the decomposing plants, which are doing good things putting back into the soil, but you can get too much there that it's choking out the growth that you want. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So the basics of all of this, of what you need to do, is mowing, fertilizing, and usually irrigation is an establishment. Those are the basics things. The extra things you can do to take it a step further is dethatching, aerifying your yard or lawn, doing some top dressing and rolling. And we'll look specifically at what some of those mean. Now the mowing heights. Most of you, how many of you, be honest, set it on the lowest setting possible and mow your grass? 3.5. 3.5? Okay. What about you? Same? Be honest, I'm not going to ridicule you. It's okay. And so what type of mower are you using? Okay. And so that's the difference of variation. What one mower calls level 4 inches does not always equate 4 inches. So being very specific of what your mower is actually doing as opposed to what the gauge says it's doing is important too. But on average, we want to keep in the summertime our cool season grasses cut from 1.5 inches at the lowest to 3 to the highest. 4 if you can stand it, and this is why. If you were cutting it and skinning it down, you are consistently taking away its ability. It needs that surface area of its leaves to absorb sun to be able to produce anything, food for itself to push its roots down. And what those roots do, pushes through the soil, increases airspace, reduces compaction, and allows for more water holding ability for that plant, a lot more movability for our organic matter, our earthworms to move through the soil. It makes for healthier soil if those roots can go through and do that, as opposed to us taking machinery to do it. So by that non-clipped, we're looking at the fact of it's a good probably 5 inches. Obviously, you don't want that in your yard. Whereas cutting it to that even 3, you're cutting it, you're going to feel like, or 4 if you can stand it, you're going to feel like you're cutting it more frequently to start with. But over time, it will start growing slower because it's putting all of its efforts growing down, and you're actually going to mow less, and you're going to have a healthier yard, healthier soil, and a healthier stand of grass. And at that 4 inches, 3.5 to 4 inches, you're also going to cut off most seed heads before they weeds before they produce seeds to continue spreading. So mow often. General average around here is about once a week. When you're mowing grass, you want to make sure that you are never taking more than about 1/3 of the plant's growth away from it at a time. If you're taking more from that at a time, it's stressing it out more than it has to, and it's not going to grow as effectively as it could. The clippings can, go ahead.
I have found that guideline
Mhm.
Totally impossible.
What?
Not taking off more than a third.
Yeah, if you do that on average, you're mowing twice a week at least.
I cut every week.
Yeah.
There's no way I could beat that.
No, you would be mowing twice a week on average. A third is the goal. Generally, we don't want to take more than a half away from it at a time. If you're mowing once a week, generally that's what you're going to do is take about the half. The half is the minimum, the third is the goal, if you have the time to mow twice a week. My recommendation with the research that we have is do once a week. You're going to get close to that information and number and maximize your time. Huh? And you're going to leave it long. And over time, you are going to mow it less because it is going to start pushing its efforts down to its roots. I had a picture, I couldn't find it, but it's of 2 yards side by side of where the homeowners, one cuts theirs to 4 inches once a week, every week. The other side skins it as low to the ground as it can get it. At the peak of doing this, yes, the 4-inch, it looks like it's consistently growing more. But if you look at it over time, the 4 inches is growing more, but it's producing less weeds. It's actually just pretty much grass. They're not doing any herbicide applications here. It's just that the grass is getting stronger and choking things out. Over here, what's coming up and it's looking like, oh, we have nice grass. You have nice weeds coming up because they're consistently getting to come up. Enjoy all of the sun because that grass isn't coming back up quick enough to choke anything else out or hold any issues with it. Also, you will eventually see with this is that even though you're cutting this lawn at 4 inches, the neighbor next door that's skinning theirs, by the time of the next week, the weeds are up higher than that 4-inch lawn is total. You see all the little, what we call thump weeds, foxtails coming back up on the edge of this yard that's being skinned consistently. Their grass isn't coming back. They're consistently mowing weeds. So how high you mow your grass is really a big deal as far as of encouraging what you have there before you consider overseeding or even starting over. And also keeping your blades sharp. It's just like when you cut yourself, a dull knife hurts worse. A dull mower cutting the grass is going to tear those grass blades. Go ahead.
Except that lawnmower blades are not sharp.
What? They're
They
sharp.
have a dull edge on them.
What we mean by sharp is what a new set would be. And the more you use them, they get dings in them, they get rolled edges, they're going to start tearing away at that grass. So when we say sharp, we don't necessarily mean blade cut sharp. We're saying what it is to a new standard. That's the analogy of a knife. It's just comparing the fact of if you have a dull one and you're hitting something with it, it's going to rip it as opposed to pulling through it like a sharp blade should. And if you go to sharpening lawnmower blades sharper than what it would, you'll cut through some great things, but you'll also, they'll actually move faster than what they're supposed to and cause bigger problems too. So you don't want to have them razor sharp. You want to sharp as a new blade would be. So thank you for specifying that.
What about mulching blade versus a cutting blade?
It depends on what you want done. A cutting blade obviously is going to push the cuts away. And you're going to, if you're bagging that up, it's better. If you're wanting to mulch it back down and leave it there and create some thatch, it's good. An adequate amount of thatch that isn't choking everything out is good because that it breaks down back into the soil, gives our organic matter something to eat and break down and does natural nutrients. So usually it's very high and adds nitrogen back to our soil is one reason we like it. But you can, using those mulcher blades too long and not coming back in and taking some of that thatch out, you're going to get too thick of a mat and it's going to start choking out the grass. Okay. Yeah. And push it back and push the seed heads back down. Yeah. And that's a good plan to work with that. You're not going to get it too thick doing that. The types of mowers that we usually look at are rotary mowers, our traditional ride mowers or push mowers. Reel mowers work well. People still like to use them. They just take a lot of manpower, whether you like to do that or not. Robotic mowers are a new thing. As opposed to using a regular traditional blade, they use what almost looks like a grinder blade at the bottom. It's a round blade that goes through. They're set up with boundary fences, kind of like you would a dog collar, boundary fence collar, invisible fences. A lot of them have that technology. Some of them are kind of like a Roomba in your house. They'll hit and bump and realize, oh, I need to go this direction and change. There are new technologies that are coming out. There's merits to using all of them. The biggest thing is making sure you're taking care of them and using the appropriate tools with them, the blades, all how we would need to be doing. Fertilizing improves turfgrass ability to compete with weeds and recover from pathogens and insect activity. And this is the big thing, and I told just a little clearer than that first one we looked at, of being able to see if our pH is off, they're not going to be getting the nutrients we need. So how we do that is a soil test. That's the tool he was asking about there, the soil probe. You push in, you try to get about 6 inches down. This time of year, that's pretty hard, unless you've been irrigating. This time of year, one yard I went to recently, about a 250-pound guy stood on the probe and it would not go into the ground at all. So timing of doing your soil testing is crucial. Generally, what we would recommend is that you would do this in the spring to get ready for overseeding in the fall. So you have all your information, have all summer to plan what you need done. Because fertilizer availability in the spring is generally harder to come by, but because that's when everybody's doing it. But also you want to make those amendments early, so it'll be there for when you plant in the fall. You want to do those amendments in the spring.
How many plugs do you put in the box?
Generally, what we recommend to do is to do at least 10 to 15 plugs around your yard sporadically. You will put them in a plastic container. If you put them in a metal container, it affects with the ions. It won't be an adequate test. It'll affect it. So we'll put it in a plastic container. You will break it up as much as you can, and then you will take enough out of that mix, which is probably about 4 times as much as you actually need, and fill up, where's my box? This box with it. And then you will come in, because it will be quite heavy generally, because our soils are still holding moisture. They're going to be pretty heavy. You will take it and spread it out on a paper towel, paper, newspaper, anything like that. And if you can leave it sitting outside in the sun to dry, great. If it's raining, bring it in, sit it somewhere on your counter, wherever you can, to let it dry out overnight, and then box it back up. It'll be significantly lighter. Thank you. Apparently I did not drink enough coffee this morning. It'll be significantly lighter, so it'll be cheaper on you to mail it. And they're going to dry it when it gets out there anyway, so you're taking a step away from it when it gets there. And then once you take it, you'll fill out the accompanying submission sheet, which with each test, you can pick 4 crop codes. So if you're not sure what type of grass you're wanting to plant, you can put Zoysia, Bermuda grass, tall fescue, fine fescue, or any combination of what you're thinking about to see where your soil sits and which one might take the less work for you. Or if you for sure know what you want to, or if you just want to encourage what's there, pick the crop code you want to. You fill it in under those crops. The sample ID, you name it whatever you want it to be. You name it your dog's name, your wife's name, your name, front, back, lawn, whatever you want to name it. As long as whatever is on that box matches what's on that piece of paper, doesn't matter what it's called. That is just so you know, if you're doing more than one sample, where it came from. And then about a week later, 2 weeks later, depends on the time of year you send it in, you will get a report back that looks something like this. All of these numbers all the way through, and then you will get a breakdown of exactly what you'll need to do. It'll come down with a nice paragraph of everything broken out. For a lawn, they do an extra step, as opposed to if you do this for a garden. For a lawn, they go through and do basic maintenance, medium maintenance, or a high maintenance option for you to see which one you want to work with. The base maintenance is just to get it to the minimal level to encourage growth. The middle of the road is going to be a little more aggressive, at least one extra application to encourage more heavier growth rate throughout the year, and that's most commonly what people work with. The high maintenance is about 4 applications a year. It's usually extremely high in nitrogen to push out some growth. If you use a lot of turf grass companies, that's generally what they do, or what falls in what we call that high maintenance category. Yes.
Has that changed, that report format changed in the last year?
It has.
Okay, because I didn't get.
Yeah, that we have a new director of the soil plant lab, and they've taken it a step further and kind of made it a lot easier to interpret, because originally when I started here 6 years ago, you would get a report and you could tell who was working that day, because some days they were written on a PhD level and were very intensive, and some days they were written with very a different way. It was a lot easier and had those methods. It's done very standardized now, and they've went through, and the layout has changed too. You used to not get all of this information at the top. You would just get a printout report of what steps to take. Now you actually get what those levels are and see what the changes will be.
That's good to know.
Mhm.
I had this done in spring of last year.
Mm-hmm.
My report was all cut and pasted, and a lot of it was contradictory.
Gotcha.
And I ended up having to call, and then I got a fantastic
Mm-hmm.
explanation. But from the report, I was just.
Yeah, we have a new soil scientist that started about middle of last year, and she's really standardized the reports and the ease to understand them a lot better.
Yeah, I had the same problem.
Mm-hmm.
I called Rich, he said, put down 10, 10, 10.
Only in the spring?
I did actually, in the 2000 fall, once
Yeah, he went through the middle of the road. We took his and broke it down into those steps, and it equated out to being 10, 10, 10. But with his specifically, it listed out you could do 5 pounds of XYZ or 4 pounds of XYZ. It was like 6 different fertilizers you could choose from. We just picked the one that would be the easiest and most readily available to work with. Now, it still will list more than one option. Mm-hmm. And we just adjust the rate just a little bit with it. And I know the formulas to adjust those rates. We can work with it to what's available. Most often, it doesn't really change a whole lot to what's there. But go ahead. You can do it now. You're just going to have a harder time getting into that soil profile right now. Yeah, I mean, you can do it. The potential of you being able to get 6 inches down right now or deep enough to get a good quality soil test just isn't likely. Fertilizing, sorry, I thought you were talking about testing. You were talking about testing. Fertilizing, no, you wouldn't want to do it right now. It's still too hot. You can do some fall fertilizing later in spring and in October when it's cooling down. Fall fertilizing, sorry. But we typically, when you're doing this, when we do any fertilizing through the summer, it's typically nitrogen to encourage the green growth, to push up, to give it more ability to absorb the sun and the nutrients it needs. Yes.
The Fescue I found on the nitrogen fertilizer is right down the street at the co-op. They've got a 3400, I think.
And they told me, don't accept anything you want.
The fertilizer, the co-op they will do custom mixes. You just pay a premium for those.
But it was the cheapest I found. You just had to be careful because it's 34.
Yes, you have to go for the rate you need with it. And see, these, for example, if you get a soil test report back and it says you need a 10-10 or a 10-0-0, you can, at a certain poundage per 1,000 square feet, you can use something that's higher. You would just reduce that poundage per square feet. It's what's available. So we can take it and change those numbers. These are just given on what's standard across what's pretty commonly available. But what's commonly available in Nashville isn't going to be the same things available over here. Same as what's in West Tennessee isn't here. So it's the reason there's usually about 6 different, it used to be 6. Now they've went to usually 3 of what 10-10-10, 13-13-13, and 19-19-19 would be fertilizers to give you options to work with. And then again, if it's not there, we can sit down and do the math and get it to what you can actually readily buy to use. So this goes into when we would want to be fertilizing. So for cool season, we're going to look at doing between March and into June, early June, depending on what our temperatures are each year. We could have gotten away with doing into June this year because we warmed up a lot slower than what our average year is. And then the spring, the fall, we're going to look for September into December, early December. Typically, we'll want to be done with everything about November the 15th. That's pretty our standard of when we're going to start seeing average of frost coming soon at that point. Mm-hmm.
Since that time overlaps with the overseeding
Mm-hmm.
time, is there an issue?
You would want to put the fertilizer down generally about a week to 2 weeks before you'd put the seed down. Mm-hmm. So it can be adequately there. Yes. Yes. I will upload it and I'll upload it so you can have access to it. And then also I have some other just handouts there for you. And then we're looking in the warm season, it's the opposite. We're going to go for that area in the middle. We're going to work predominantly from May to September with these. You would want to get this when you would need it for that soil, for that type. So the fertilizer rates, everybody calls here wanting me to give you an exact, like a magic number. There's no real way to do that because the example I'm going to give you is was done for a commercial scale. We were doing 45 acres for hay production. She got a little antsy, did not wait for her soil test report because the co-op could come out that day and get everything spread. She put out lime because it's what she just assumed she would need, got everything done, got her soil test report back. She absolutely did not need any lime whatsoever. So that lime she put out actually made her pasture too basic, increased her weed pressure, did a lot more damage, and spent $2,000 she absolutely didn't need to. Or they did. It was, but for those reasons, and on a lawn, we're not going to spend that much money, obviously, but you're going to potentially spend money if you just go throwing things out there that you potentially don't need, and we're going to do more damage than what we would need to, or more damage than good. And too much of a good thing is not a good thing. If you already have pretty high nitrogen numbers and you go to throwing more nitrogen out there, you're just going to successfully burn up your lawn. So you want to make sure that we're hitting the levels we need. So that soil test is really important. A lot of people cringe or don't want to pay that $15, but that $15 can be the most sound investment you make when it comes to doing any type of planting. Yes.
Back on the soil test,
Mm-hmm.
when I had mine done last year,
Mm-hmm.
there were other options
Mm-hmm.
on there about whether you wanted this additional test.
Mm-hmm.
Are they still there?
They are.
I didn't know what to do with the information that I got.
You don't have to do those. Most of them generally come at an extra expense. That basics, or it says plus soil test now, is how it's worded. Still one from out here. But you would just do this nutrient test. The organic matter, things like that, we generally don't need for a lawn. Texture is done for USDA standards if you're working with their NRCS plans. It's not, those are usually things that a homeowner won't need to work with. They're there if you're working with those organizations that require that extra information. So you would just want to do the nutrient test. And there are extra testing and things that can be done to check metal levels, things like that. But you have to contact the lab directly for those.
Yeah, I bought all of them because I thought, I'll buy all of them. My grass will look better.
The thing is, they don't necessarily provide nutritional information. It does help us understand our soil better, but what you need to be able to make your lawn most successful, you just need to know the nutrients of it. So irrigate, we talked about this. You want to usually do early in the morning, like literally 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. And then in the evening, and then you can do 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. midday, because its hottest point of the day is generally from 2 to 4 in the afternoon. So we don't want to be watering then. It's too hot. So with that heat of it, what it does is it heats the water up and it scorches the leaves. It will literally cook the leaves. So we don't want to do that. So that's where you're causing that stress there, and it's going to invite in disease pressure. That's probably why you started seeing the brown patch come in, as it was causing that stress there, and it just makes it extremely susceptible to those fungal spores at that point. And then usually, if we're doing this, we're of a time scenario, you're going to look at anywhere from 1/10 to 3/10 of water a day when you're doing this. There are some studies out there that do comparison of doing deep watering, say 1 day a week or every few days. When it comes to turf grass and establishment of it, it does better of keeping consistent moisture instead of getting heavily wet, drying out, heavily wet, drying out. We want to keep that consistency of just the saturation level it needs. Obviously, if it's raining, you're going to adjust what it's doing. Sticking your finger down into the soil tells you a lot of things, whether you need to water or not. You want it to be moist, usually within about 1 inch of the top of the soil if possible, but you don't want to saturate things, because all you're doing at that point is causing the roots to rot. So the thatch, if you have more than 1/2 inch in there, generally we want to dethatch it, or consider dethatching it. So because at that point, what it's doing is too much is there to prevent adequate growing for those roots and for the lower ends of that plant. So that's probably, when you look at it, Bermuda is really bad about this, because it runs right along the ground really well. As that thatch builds up, those lower levels of the grass blades won't be producing. So it'll have a really nice stand on top, but when you look down, the bottom of it doesn't have anything. And it's generally because our thatch level's gotten too high, and we need to take some of it out so it actually can produce leaf all the way back to its base to give a good thick stand. Aerifying is literally going through and pulling plugs of the soil out to increase airflow and create pore space. This is also, it's something we can do manually if we need to, but that's also why we want to encourage root production, because it increases and aerifies naturally, so we don't have to come in and put more pressure on top of the ground, because all these equipment coming through, riding through, even our mowers, can increase compaction. So when we're mowing, we want to, I thought it was the next slide, but it's not. You want to change directions and come at it different directions each time, because it's going to reduce that compaction to keep it to where you don't have to aerify or aerate as often. And if it doesn't have appropriate oxygen in the soil, our organic matter can't continue to grow and thrive like it should. So if your soil is extremely compacted, we'll want to aerify to start with, and then encourage that root growth to help keep it open and those pore spaces open. So top dressing is literally taking a thin layer of organic matter, and whether that's sand, topsoil, we're needing to control some other issues or encourage moisture control. We might even recommend types of potting mixes to do this with, to put a thin layer out to help even out areas and help encourage the top growing zones of our property. And it also can help smooth the surface, and it also speed up that thatch decomposition, because you're putting something on top of it to hold moisture, which will increase the decomposition rate. Rolling, generally, we don't do a lot of this. This roller, you can put water and sand in, it increases the weight. We'll roll it to help smooth out areas as we're working with it. This is more commonly done when you're first building and establishing your bed to smooth it out than actually coming in. You can also use these if you're doing a cover crop in your garden and you want to crimp it at the top, roll it down to where it'll decompose naturally. You can use these as well. You can also use a 50-gallon barrel if you have one. You can get creative with what your roller looks like. So we are getting a little closer to one. I'll move through some of this a little quickly, but I have a handout that talks just about the common diseases of what to look for each time of year. The biggest issue we have here are the fungal diseases, dollar spot, brown spot, some powdery mildews, some rusts with it. And what we would look for In treating those, it varies based upon what that is. Most commonly, we might look at a copper-based fungicide for most of our fungal things. But if you have a specific issue, take a picture of it, send it to me. We can talk about a lot and figure out exactly what you need to treat it. I also have a handout here that goes through the descriptions of what those are and what the control practices are for it. Insects are the same way. These are common ones that we have here in East Tennessee. They're all handled pretty well using insecticidal sprays or granular sprays. We just want to watch when we're applying these and how we're working with these, because it does affect the bee population. That's one downside to the sprays. The granulars have a less impact on that. So we generally lean towards using those. White grubs are a big issue, and they'll dupe you really well on thinking you have brown patch in your yard. But a lot of times we'll see, if you take a shovel and pull back, you'll see those white grubs. They're eating the roots of the grass, and it will mimic what brown spot looks like. So control of those with some, it also helps. What you treat the ground with those also helps with ticks and fleas in your yard as well, with doing the granular applications. A weed can be defined by a lot of different things. Generally, it's a plant growing somewhere you don't want it. Bermuda grass can be a weed to some people. It can be wonderful for some people, is a good example of that. Put weed killer on my yard and half my yard died. Well, it's probably because half of your yard was weeds to start with. So that's why we're wanting to encourage the maintenance of these. And we would look at these in 3 different categories. Our broadleaf weeds, our grassy weeds, and our sedge grasses. In general, basic ways you can tell the difference. A lot of the sedges will take on the appearance of grass when they grow, but if you'll look at the base of it, that sedge is usually triangular. Whereas when you roll it here, you'll feel the little points of the triangle. As you roll the others between your fingers, it'll be cylinder with it. So just some random tricks. And these are some of our common annual weeds here. Purple dead nettle is a big problem. These curly dock, crabgrass, Johnson grass, all these are pretty common issues. So, yes.
I noticed you have one of my favorites in the weeding category, that's clover. In fact,
I want it. Yes.
Half of my front yard, well, 2/3 is clover.
Yes.
And then 1/3 is just that plantain.
Yes.
And so that's what I'm trying to get rid of.
Gotcha.
So same ideas though, but as far as nutrients, so if I spread clover seeds and just top dress it.
Yes, you can do that. And then there are some, if you want to spray something to help control it, there are chemicals that won't impact clover that will focus on more of that. If it's what I'm thinking of, it's more of a broadleaf. Yeah, they're going to be affected by 2 different modes of action. The plantain it uptakes differently than what the clover would. So can't remember the chemical name off the top of my head, but get with me. There are things you can use, and this is a tool you can use too. It's the Mobile Weed Manual, mobileweedmanual.com, and we've had it out for a while. We've been testing it. It's been updated, and it's a wonderful thing now. If you can go in and you can scroll through and look at the pictures, and then you can click on that weed and put in what type of grass you have and whether you want to treat it pre-emergently, or if you already, obviously, if you see it, we need to treat it post-emergently, and figure out exactly what you need to treat it with, the chemical that it will give you the active ingredient and some example trade names. And if it's been tested by UT, it will list out how its efficacy rating, if it was high impact to no impact with it. There are some that are listed and labeled that we don't have data for, and it will say that on there, but it will be very targeted to what you're wanting to treat and what you're wanting to save. And then turfgrass weed, the turfgrassweeds.org also just has a lot of good publications to be able to pull and use. Generally speaking, there is a schedule and a calendar you can look for of, we're wanting to do pre-emergence. usually in February to April for our summer weeds. We want to treat it before we see them. And then you're going to do some spraying in the summer for our broadleaf weeds. Usually we look at doing like 2,4-D, things like that, but you need to watch again of what some of these are mixed with, because even though they don't have, they can be detrimental still to bee populations. They're pretty sensitive, even though these are herbicides, not pesticides. Some of those chemicals still can come with those warnings. So we want to watch when we're spraying those. And we'd look and continue to do, and then we'd also do a pre-emergent in late August to September for those winter weeds and those spring weeds that are going to come up again. And all this will be on the PowerPoint when I send it to you. And then always make sure you read the label and follow the labels. A label is literally a law, so you want to make sure you follow it to a T. You want to make sure when you're looking at all of these and the recommendations that we give you the active ingredient name. We're not allowed to recommend one trade name or brand over another. So I will tell you glyphosate, for example. Now we all know, for the most part, that is Roundup, but it is sold under 50,000 other trade names out there. I believe it's actually sold under a little over 1,000 different trade names. So you want to make sure you're looking at it. There's also different concentration and different rates of it. So you want to make sure that you are reading exactly how to mix it to the standard that you are buying the chemical for, and not just mixing and going. For it to be effective, it has to be mixed to the rates that are on the label. If you don't want to use chemicals in your lawn, adequate mowing and mowing at the appropriate times can do it. Also, just continuing to pull it will work. It takes a lot of muscles, a lot of strong arm, and a lot of time to do that. But the true only way to not have weeds in your yard and not use these chemicals is completely remove those roots from it. So it's going to be a continuous option and move as you go forward. So make sure you're mowing at the right height. Make sure we're fertilizing appropriately, irrigating if we need to, and we're choosing to plant the right time and the right thing we need to use for our yard. The resources used here, and we just scratched the surface. This entire book is nothing but our resource for extension agents on turf grass. You can get an entire degree, literally a bachelor's, master's, and a PhD in turf grass science. So we just scratched the surface today with all of what you can do and how you can look at the science of this and have a better yard. So if you have more questions, I probably created a lot of questions today, and that's good. Keeps job security, so we can work with. And then my neighbor's yard is always greener together. So if you haven't been through Harriman, go check out our Everywhere UT sign. If you have any questions, I will gladly take them. But the first one, do a plug. Yes, this is a part of the Master Gardener's Lunch and Learn series. We will have Mr. Tom Jeske on September 11th talk about bulb dividings and flowers. And then Horticulture will be our own Miss Lucy Stevenson in October. So please feel free to join us for those. Follow us on Facebook. If you provide your email back there, you will get email updates about them as well. So with that, do I have any questions while I'll hand this out?
Grass seeds are
Mm-hmm.
incredibly expensive.
Yes.
It's like they're made of gold.
It's because of the time it takes to produce them.
The best deal that I have
Mm-hmm.
found has been, again, did any of you found any great places for seed deals?
I found that Fescue grass with the co-op. I used it. We're gonna brand off him, but the old hand was Zoysia Grass that I'm trying. So I didn't buy that at all. Yeah, that's expensive.
They were a lot less than Site One.
Yeah, I have to tell you, I'm very cautious about finding things online.
I will say,
Be really careful about the wheat crop.
Like getting down the swell with the grass. I did that in one of my yards, about 10,000 square foot yard. I mean, it was a nightmare. I'll never put straw out of my seed again. They don't,
Is it straw? Hey,
whatever you get over here next door.
or is it straw?
Yeah,
It depends on the time of year which one they have.
and it was just a nightmare.
Yeah.
I think it was straw, but I thought it was. And I did buy some, it's unbelievably expensive. Pennington makes a weed-free
Mhm.
straw.
Yes.
And I tried that, and it was better, okay? But I've come to the realization where I live, it's not the straw, it's not the seed, it's the ground, it's the seed.
We have a very deep seed bed.
The seed bed that's in the soil, and when they built my house and they bought this topsoil, I'm sure I just given somebody pasture to it.
And the more you work it up, the more you're bringing to the top when it comes to our seed beds. Unfortunately, we grow everything really well. All of its problems really well. We can look at it. Thank y'all very much for coming. If you haven't signed in, please do leave your email address if you'd like the slides. And we'll also point them on, I'll post them online with the live streams as well. But if you'll put your email address down so I can send them to you directly, I'll do that before I leave here this afternoon.